Your managing agents should be going to your properties, documenting this, and ideally sharing a report with you. An agent who says that they manage HMOs needs to have a decent book of business. I would be asking metrics around voids and relet timeframes. Do they have all their compliance stuff automated in such a way that those things are being built into the infrastructure? It is a proactive management piece. It's very different to single lets.
You're listening to Expat Property Story, a podcast in which I share my story to smooth the way for you to have your own Expat Property Story. Hello there, this is episode 317 of Expat Property Story, the twice-weekly podcast for remote investors in UK property in all four corners of the planet. This episode is for every remote investor who has ever handed over an HMO to a managing agent and wondered quietly whether the person on the other end actually knows what they're doing. And even if they do know what they're doing, do they do what they say they're doing? There's loads of great advice for HMO landlords in today's show, and do keep listening to the end for the one spare room tactic that costs nothing, takes 30 seconds, and most managing agents don't bother to do, but which could be the difference between a void that lasts a week and one that lasts a month. When today's guest had a baby, she was already an HMO landlord and needed time off, but within weeks, she was, to use her own words, back on the tools. Her agent wasn't checking fire alarms, wasn't documenting inspections, and wasn't doing check-ins or check-outs properly. Now, I'm sure you've all heard of the proverb, if you want something done right, do it yourself. Well, that's what Mithala and her business partner Lisa did. They set up an HMO managing agency called Ideal Urban.
At the start, we just couldn't find anybody that was really doing it in that space, in that area. And that's why you come across so many different self-managing landlords, single-let agents who say that they do HMOs. But once you start digging a little bit deeper, you sort of realise that it's not really viable. Because, I mean, at the start I had to, because I was pregnant, and, I decided to hand it over to an agent who said that they would, they can do it. But quite quickly I realised that they just weren't right to. So I was back on the tools quite quickly after my first baby, actually.
What sort of mistakes were they making?
Well, they just weren't doing check-ins and check-out properly, inventories properly. When I was asking them about the inspections, about how often they were doing it and what they were picking up, it just wasn't documented and evidenced properly. And I was like, well, I would have dealt with that. Why have you sat on that sort of thing? And because I knew what I was expecting to see, I suppose, first I thought, oh, is it my standards? I've got quite high standards. Maybe I'm asking perhaps a bit too much, But then when I met Lisa, I was like, oh, no, okay, this is, what I think should be standard. And at the time we were doing it, it wasn't mandatory to do inspections monthly or anything like that. And obviously, even now, it's not mandatory to do it. But it's kind of like, if you look at what you should be doing from a fire point of view, if it's a grade D alarm system, you should be testing the alarms monthly. If it's grade A, then it's weekly. A lot of these agents just don't have that knowledge. That's what drives how often you should be going to these properties and testing various things. And they just weren't doing that, to be honest with you.
What Mithala found was that standard buy-to-let agents were just not up to the job.
A lot of single agents try to do HMOs thinking it's rather similar, but it really isn't. It's such a niche, and it's really proactive management. And what we found was that a lot of the local high street agents just weren't, I suppose, skilled enough to be able to manage HMOs, because it's a completely different ballgame. Managing a property with 6 different tenants, 6 different likes and wants is one thing, let alone, managing the turnovers. And then just the compliance side as well, like you've got it times 6 and at different times, just on an individual basis, but also as a property basis. And obviously that landscape is changing more and more. Unless you're on top of it, you're just not going to be skilled enough to do it. So we quickly realised that, because we were self-managing individually, our skill sets together had sort of the makings of a good agency, because Lisa's brilliant at front-facing side of things, and she's brilliant at dealing with the tenants, and I'm more sort of operational, given my banking background, a little bit more on the numbers, etc. We realised that we were yin and yang.
So what makes a good HMO agent then?
An agent who says that they manage HMOs needs to have a decent book of business that manages HMOs, because one that does 1 or 2 is not systemized or geared up to support the infrastructure of what HMOs really require, because it is a proactive management piece. It's very different to single lets. We're not a massive agency. Me and Lisa coming together, we had 60 units between us. So we weren't, massive, but I would say 50 units upwards.
So you manage 60 rooms now,
Now we manage about 100 plus.
but when you started it was 60.
Correct, yeah. And I think it had to be enough to be systemized like a business. If you've got one or two HMOs, you might be able to just self-manage them, yourself, if you want to save on those margins. Although I think the sort of landscape we're going into now, you have to ask yourself what you want, really. Once you've kind of gone beyond that, it really isn't something that you can just sort of have as a passive investment. It's, something you have to spend time doing, because the consequences are massive now if you get something wrong.
So the first thing is to have a decent book. What would you say the second thing is?
Understanding how often are they carrying out those inspections, and how proactively they're dealing with their maintenance that are being picked up as part of those inspections.
Okay, so you were mentioning before a little bit about how often you should go round. Is it all linked to fire safety? Is that your starting point?
It would be my starting point because, like I mentioned, a grade A HMO requires weekly fire testing, which means you're going to have to go to that property every week to test the alarm, different zones, document that, keep it on site, and also keep it in a centralised location in case there is a fire. And so that, that's the minimum length of time you should be going to a property of that sort of grade.
For people who don't know, what is grade A, grade B, grade C?
Well, it actually goes, funnily enough, you've got your grade A's, which is sort of 6+ bedrooms, or perhaps one that's part of a mixed use building. So some of our ones, we've got commercial at the bottom, and they might have some flats in there as well as the HMO. So you can see there's different zones. So a grade A panel basically ensures that each of those zones, each of those areas are tested weekly to make sure that the whole building would be notified if there was a fire in one location.
So that's 6 and above. It's not like 7, it's 6 and above, right?
Well, it's quite nuanced actually, but it's not an exact science, which is why you really need a fire risk assessor coming into your property to make sure you have got the right alarm systems in place. Or actually, London Fire Brigade are brilliant as well. If you ask them to come to the house, they will give you some tips and stuff like that. But in terms of an official application, it would have to be a fire risk assessment, which you need anyway as part of your HMO license application. And then the grade D are sort of the 1-6 bedrooms and below. This is obviously just quite a wide, broad brush. That one only has to be tested monthly, for example, in terms of the actual fire alarms. But at the same time as that, you've obviously got your carbon monoxide testing, which has to be done monthly, your fire blanket testing as well. And the fire doors should really be done monthly now, I would say, where you're testing to make sure that the doors are shutting on its own. It's got the right furniture and stuff to go with that. So there's a lot to sort of be done at each inspection. And historically, when we were self-managing it, we were doing it sort of quarterly, to be honest with you. But obviously, as I mentioned, apart from trying to sort of do this more proactively, the rules now require it really for you to be doing this more frequently, and hence the monthly inspections for communal areas, and the more detailed ones by going into tenants' rooms and stuff like that are quarterly at least as well.
Obviously, this is a podcast for expats who, like myself, for example, live thousands of miles away. How can you be sure that your managing agent is doing this on your behalf?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think this is where it comes back to documentation, not only for compliance, but your managing agents should be going to your properties, documenting this, and ideally sharing a report with you. We use Inventory Hive actually to capture all of that. So we've got a combination of pictures, flags up any maintenance things which need to be addressed. And we agree with our landlords, a threshold or an approval level. But anything compliance related like that will have to be dealt with immediately. So I would, if I was somebody, especially not living in the UK and not having visibility of going to my property regularly, I would absolutely be ensuring that my agent is giving me evidence of that and proactively dealing with any other maintenance bits which are identified as part of those inspections. That's absolutely key, I think.
Can you tell me more about Inventory Hive? I've not heard of that.
It's just an application tool, actually. It's similar to Inventory Base. A lot of agents will either have it in-house. it basically allows you to set up a report which reflects, I suppose, the floor plan of the property, and will therefore have various checks built into the report. Now, Inventory Hive also allows, it's fairly bespoke in the sense it will allow you to add various things, etc. And it's pretty good because it can give you some default sort of responses, which you then go in and either accept or change. So it can be very detailed if you want it to be. And the view we take is, your monthly communal ones are a little bit more high level, and obviously it's only the communal areas, but the quarterly sort of detailed ones, which include the tenants' rooms, are, a bit more in depth. And whilst we're sending those things to our landlords, we'd absolutely be making recommendations on what should be done, what should be prioritised, what can be deprioritised as landlords, like I mentioned. It's always about finding that cost balance as well, because we appreciate that costs are rising, rents are in some areas softening. We're all doing this to make money, right? So you need to make sure that you're profit engineering at every stage. Are you getting the right rents in? Is your agent proactively making sure that the rents you're achieving for your rooms are where they need to be? We often take on new clients, and when we take them on, we do an audit of not just their compliance, which is obviously key, but their market rents. And often, they're under market rents, especially when they've been self-managing. A lot of self-managing landlords kind of, I think, oh, I'm okay with that price, and have left it like that for years. And they don't have a finger on the pulse around, how much they can achieve for those rooms. But it's when you stack them up, especially with an HMO, £20, £25 per room extra across 6 bedrooms immediately is going to give you £200.
I just want to go quickly back to Inventory Hive and Inventory Base. Could they just be inputting all the data into that and not actually visiting the property? You can tell I'm scarred by some bad experiences.
Don't blame you. I mean, they should be taking pictures of your property. So as long as you know what your property looks like, your reports, your output should reflect that. I suppose, arguably, the communal areas, you could say, oh, are they actually going around and taking pictures every time? And, does it look different to last month's report? Gosh, I wouldn't have thought anyone would do that, but yeah, it's possible, I guess. But yeah, you look at the commentary. As long as you're reviewing the reports, the commentary, and any observations,
you'd be astonished. I had inklings, very strong inklings last year, that a serviced accommodation agent that we were using was doing direct bookings behind our back.
This is it, isn't it? It's about trying to find somebody that's trustworthy as well. And I think one of the things that we sort of pride ourselves in, I guess, is our values. We don't just work with anybody as well, actually. We only work with landlords where their properties are of a good standard, because, we believe in providing good housing to our tenants. We genuinely believe that. And so, the stock that we create is of a good standard, and therefore we have to align with our landlords too. If somebody comes to us with a not so nice property, it's not going to work for both people, is it? Finding the right agent is also about making sure that you align to them on a personal level and trust them, because it's such a big part of the process, isn't it? Actually, it's not just a physical thing. Like, you need to trust that they're going to make the right decisions, and it's hard to identify. And I think, that's partly why we've also got our event. We want people to know us as people. We stand up in that room every month, and people get to know us, and we're part of the community. And I think that speaks volumes as well.
So it's making sure they have a decent book, making sure they're proactive with compliance, making sure they're trustworthy. What else would you add to that makes a good agent?
I would say probably, I suppose, what kind of software are they using? Do they have all their compliance stuff automated in such a way that, those things are being built into the infrastructure?
And what should they be asking? Which kinds of software do you think they should be using?
We personally use Coho. There are a lot of good applications out there. I've heard Street's pretty good as well. But you ultimately just want to make sure that, are the compliance reminders automated? Is it all centralized in one place? Where's tenant comms happening? That's so important now more than ever. I know a lot of people are conversing with tenants on WhatsApp and, what's convenient, because what people use day to day. But, we always direct our tenants back to Coho. Even if we're having a conversation, can you follow it up with a message on Coho, or our team do that, vice versa? Because you need something centralized for an audit trail. And I know it sounds boring, but it's so key, because you need to be able to evidence these things. So I'd be asking an agent, how are you managing your comms? Like, I know it sounds a bit detailed, but it's actually quite key. This is a people business, and of course, you're going to be meeting people, you're going to be speaking to people on the phone, but you must always follow it up with some sort of written evidence, I would say. So I'd definitely be asking about that. I know it's basic, but have you read the T's and C's? A lot of people sign up to a contract with an agent without really checking what actually is included, what isn't included, because a lot of people perhaps market themselves at a certain rate and then there's loads of add ons. What is your net profit after all of that is taken into account? So it's one thing getting people through the door, but what are they giving you in return for what price, basically?
Data around voids is also an important factor.
I would be asking metrics around voids and relet timeframes. I'd want to know if somebody is given in their notice, how quickly are you marketing my property soon after? What's your average sort of turnaround time on reletting rooms? What's their revenue yield generally? How are they training their staff and how often are they keeping abreast of these things? I would probably also ask to speak to a current client. That's the best way, I think. And that's how we sort of vet our builders. It's how we do everything, right? Speak to other people who have used them, and you're going to get an honest opinion, aren't you? Especially if you're given a couple of people and get an option to call whichever ones you want. And I think anyone that is doing things well will be transparent about that. I know these are all very specific questions, but they're absolutely key because it shows you how dynamic are that team. We can't control the market, but we can control how we react to the market and how proactively we're dealing with things. So I'd want to know how skilled and proactive the team are in dealing with the day-to-day operations of every part of my property.
That's just the beginning. Subscribe and hear the full conversation.